Welcome to another Observability Clinic, Practitioner's Guide to Optimizing End User Experience. Jonesy, you are back for session number 2.
I am. Thank you very much for having me back. We had so much fun session 1.
Exactly.
Decided to do it again.
Exactly. And actually diving deeper, more into practitioner focus. But folks, in case this is the first episode you watch with Jonesy, there's another session out there. It's called Observe, Analyze, and Optimize Your End User Experience. Digital Performance 101. It was a great session where you gave a great overview. I learned a ton, especially around the basics of real user monitoring. You explained above the fold. You explained the W3C navigation and resource timings. You explained all of the new ways that Google is measuring performance. So a lot of great stuff. And I think today you have prepared a little more deep dive. So what have you prepared, Jonesy?
Yeah, no. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to do stuff that's more practical, more hands-on-ish. So let's actually just get into the agenda here. Basically, today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the deployment options for Dynatrace Real User Monitoring. We'll talk about some of the things that you might want to do in terms of how to configure detection rules. We'll talk about how you enable session replay. We didn't talk too much about that during our last session. It's a critical component of the real user monitoring. So we'll show you how easy it is to set up today. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go into some things that you might want to consider to configure first. So we'll talk about framework detection. We'll talk about user tagging. We'll talk about user action naming rules, conversion goals, and privacy rules. And then finally, what we'll do is we'll wrap up on how to best explore the data. So we'll talk about, the different views that we provide for doing analysis, how you can do charting of the data, and then, how you can add those charts to your dashboards. So that's pretty much it. We got no more slides. We're just going to go straight in. How does that sound, Andy?
That sounds awesome. And just as we did the other time, if you have a moment to breathe, or if you need a moment to breathe, feel free to ask me a question, or if I have a question, because I'm kind of playing the role of our audience and of our community. And folks, if you're watching this and if you have questions later on, the best way to get your questions out there is either through community.dynatrace.com. There's a lot of great discussion forums. But also, if you're in the product itself, you can always on the top right click on the chat, and then you get direct access to our product experts. But Jonesy, let's do this.
Absolutely, and also, if we're going to throw some plugs out there, let's throw a plug out there for Dynatrace University as well.
Oh yeah,
because there's a ton of content on Dynatrace University. That's great. And for those folks who are watching this, if it's before February, the middle of February, you might want to think about Perform as well. So our user conference, where you actually get hands-on training sessions doing many of the things that we're going to be showing today. So let's just get right into the demo. Let's actually just let's do some of this stuff. All right, so I'm flipping over to Dynatrace. Here we have an instance of Dynatrace. Now, I've got a couple of different instances where, all of this stuff is really sort of configured, so I can walk you through some examples. Then I've got another instance of Dynatrace where I can go in and manipulate things and, show you how to change, the rules. Now, right out of the box, when you deploy the Dynatrace 1 agent, the very first thing that agent is looking to do is it's starting to discover technology processes that are running on your host. Now, if that technology process happens to be something like, well, let's just say for argument's sake, Java, IIS, Apache web server for that matter, Nginx, Node.js, what's going to happen is our agent is going to automatically insert into those technology processes some modules. These modules, basically what they do is they allow us to obviously do all of the interesting things around the network monitoring and tagging and tracing and all that great stuff. But more importantly, from a real user monitoring perspective, what they're also going to do is they're going to start to set up the automatic injection of the Dynatrace instrumentation into your web pages. This is, colloquially, we talk about it as we're going to insert automatically a tag into your page. What that tag does is that allows us to capture what the user is doing on that page. Now that tag, it's JavaScript, and Dynatrace will, out of the box, it will basically do this for you automatically. And what will happen is that telemetry that comes off, that data that we're collecting off of those web pages, are going to come back to the Dynatrace cluster. So there's not a lot that you have to do to configure that component. But what will happen is the data will typically come back. I'm going to go down here into this view here. I'm in the left nav. You can see I'm under digital experience. I'm clicking on web. What's going to happen is that data is typically going to come back to something called the default web application. So out of the box, you just deployed the Dynatrace One agent. And now what's happening is, as traffic is building up, essentially what's happening is that traffic is going to be collected and it's going to show up here in this default web application. Now, because we're instrumenting things at the process level, what will happen is, more often than not, you may have multiple web applications that are running off of that process. So that IIS service, that Apache process that you could have multiple websites or applications from. We use the term applications to define that front end. And so one of the very first things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go in and set up what we call some detection rules. Now, there's a number of different ways that you can do this. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that this can be done. Now, the first way is you can just do this completely manually. You go into your settings, and in your settings, there's this subnav right here. You'll go down to web and mobile monitoring, and then you're going to scroll down here to where you see application detection. So in the application detection, this is where you can set up rules to allow you to define one application as being different from another application. So here inside of this is an instance of Dynatrace that I have control over, so I can do things in it. In here, you can see that I've set up a couple of different rules. Now, these rules are really simple to set up. You can basically go in and use any one of these matchers. And so these matchers are basically saying, hey, if the domain contains this string, or if the domain ends with, or if the domain equals, and you can also do it based upon the observed URL for the traffic. So if the URL contains or ends with or equals or even starts with, we want to have that traffic become part of a separate application. So that's one way of doing this. This is probably in this particular case, this is effectively just the manual way. It's very straightforward. You just go in, give it a rule. Now, what will happen is, if you have multiple applications, eventually inside of Dynatrace, they're going to look like this. So here you can see I have a fully fleshed out instance of Dynatrace, and we have multiple applications. Some of these are here I've got one called Hipster Shop. Here I've got one called Angular Easy Travel. You want to, as a best practice, you want to give your applications a name. And so, what will happen is, by default, typically it's going to pull out something like, say, whatever that domain might be. But here you can see that I've called this one Hipster Shop Logs. So I actually gave it a meaningful name. That's actually a good best practice. And so that's something, again, you can do when you're in and editing the configuration for that application. We'll get to that in a moment. But to sort of give you an idea as to what the settings look like here, if we go into that same location where we're going to web and mobile monitoring from our settings, you can see down here, if I go into application detection, I have now just a laundry list of detection rules, right? So all these different detection rules here are basically allowing me to control where that traffic is going to be organized inside of Dynatrace. Andy, is that pretty clear?
Yeah, pretty clear. And I really like that you gave the overview in the bigger environment. And what I've seen with some of our users, they, for instance, have an app that they are deploying and running for different regions. So for instance, they have like, Web Store Europe, Web Store US,
Mhm.
Web Store Canada, and then you have different, oh yeah, like you have it here, Easy Travel Canada. Another thing that I know from internally in Dynatrace, because we use Dynatrace to monitor also everything that we have, right? We have, for instance, our production instance is monitoring the Dynatrace website, the Dynatrace community portal, the Dynatrace University. So basically these are apps because they're business critical apps for you, and therefore you can define them and say, I want to monitor all this based on the URLs or the host name. This everything that Dynatrace monitors here from a real user monitoring perspective should be shown and captured in the context of this particular app. Yeah, it's cool.
Absolutely. So just while we're still on this topic, here's the shortcut. Okay, I'm going to get. I walked everyone through how to set this up using our settings. Now I'm going to give you the quicker and easier way of doing this. So once you're in your default web application and you see this traffic coming in, and you'll have traffic coming in because you'll see, in this particular case, the data showing up within this view inside of your default web application. But what you can do, which is an even easier way to split up your traffic into separate applications, is if you scroll to the bottom here, and you can see here that you have this option for the top 3 included domains. So one of the things that I learned, and this is a little tip, is that I can just go into one of these domains like this, and I get this option to create a new application. So that is much easier, a lot less navigating around, but basically I could say I want that domain to be a part of a new application, or I can transfer it to an existing application that I might have set up. So that is a real easy tip that, once you've got traffic coming into your default web application, just scroll down to the domain view, click on that particular domain, and then create a new application just by clicking on this button. That's it.
I did not know that. That's cool.
There you go. Yeah, we always learn something with these sessions. I love doing these sessions.
Yeah.
So the next thing, once you've got your application defined, it's going to look like this. Basically, and actually just a caveat. So once you first define your web application, this is a key thing. It will only, the data that you will see in that new application will only be new data. So any existing data that's already been captured will remain in the application that it was originally in. So if it's in that default web application, it's going to remain there. Only once you create this definition does the new data start showing up. So it might take a minute or two, but once you've created that new application, it'll start showing up and you'll start seeing data flowing into these charts. Now that I've got my detection rules set up and I've got my applications defined, now there's different things that I want to do in terms of enabling functionality, enabling features. First thing that you'll want to do here is you're going to go over to the right-hand side to this ellipsis, and you're going to click on it, and you're going to click on Edit. This gives you all of the configuration rules at the application level. All right. So there's a couple of different things that I'm going to point out here. First off, depending upon how you are planning to capture data, you do have a couple of options. Now, I mentioned that out of the box, you deploy the Dynatrace One agent, and it's automatically going to start collecting this, these user sessions and this real user monitoring data. There may be scenarios. Where you might have to manually insert the Dynatrace JavaScript tag for it to show up in your page. If that is the case, you can go down here into the injection control rules, and you can control how that injection is going to be done. And so now what you get is basically by default out of the box, it will almost always be set up for automatic injection. However, if you need to, you can use manual insertion, where you can literally select how you want to manually insert this data. It could be through, we'll provide you effectively the JavaScript tag, a code snippet. You can even deploy the agent code in line within your web page, or a one agent JavaScript tag. So you've got multiple different formats that you can basically manually insert this tag within your application. Where is this useful? This is particularly useful for SaaS-based applications where you can't place a one agent. So what if I have something like Workday as an example, or maybe a Salesforce app? Actually, let's put a pin in the Salesforce one, because there's a better way of getting data out of Salesforce than this. But even something like Office 365 as an example. So if you wanted to place these tags into those applications, you don't have the agent, you would do it using these manual insertion options. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, if we're in these settings, it's very straightforward. You can go in here into, like, say, something like the general setup. This is where you can define and select your key performance metric. By default, we use visually complete. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, because we just actually did an entire session. We talked at length about why visually complete is one of the best indicators of end user performance that we have. If you want to choose something else, you can do that. You can basically just select this drop-down list and choose any one of these other metrics as being the key performance metric. Now, the key performance metric is typically what's going to show up in most of the default out-of-the-box charts, right? Now, you can do this for your load actions. That's when you're loading a page. You can do this also for your XHR actions. XHR actions are those asynchronous functions that occur. You see this very often in in pages that basically are single page applications. That's the easiest way to describe it, where you're never going from one page to another page. You're staying within an existing page, and it's dynamically updating based upon what you're doing in it. So those XHR functions, we look at them separately than a load action. And if you need to set up any sort of custom action, you can do that as well. But down below here, this is where you can set up those thresholds to drive things like how Dynatrace measures and scores end user experience. So here is where you can set up the things that control how the AppDex will display within Dynatrace. And then if you want, you can also choose, actually, that's pretty new. I've just learned something new as well, because I have not seen this before, but apparently now you also have a potential fallback metric. And then what we really wanted to show at this point is how do you turn on something like session replay? Now, session replay is the ability for us to actually visually replay the user session. And in that particular case here, if you go into the enablement and cost control, you can see that there is literally a switch. That's it. You throw that switch, and that turns on the session replay. Now, just so everyone's aware, when you do enable the session replay, the user sessions that are being captured will use up more DEM units. So just, I want to be totally transparent so everyone understands that the way this is licensed and consumed is through DEM units. And when you turn on the session replay, it does consume more DEM units per user session. But literally all you have to do is throw a switch, and that turns it on. And so that's it. So from a deployment standpoint, we had talked about, and let's just do as a quick review, Andy, we talked about how typically with the one agent, the Dynatrace one agent will automatically inject this JavaScript instrumentation. You would want to go into your default web app, and you would want to define application detection rules. Once you've defined those application detection rules, you can go in and control the settings simply by looking within your application and going to the ellipsis in the upper right-hand corner, click on edit, and that's how you get access to all of the settings. Any questions on this?
Really cool. I just have one additional comment on the injection piece, because as you know, right, I'm big on automation and DevOps, and I saw one of the things in the injection screen. I think it was the last tab, the retrieve by API, which means as part of your CI/CD build process, you can even retrieve that code snippet through an API call so that you always have the latest and greatest as part of your build process. And then you can add it to your page before you upload it to whatever your web server or your S3 bucket or wherever it is. And I think this is also one of the reasons besides SaaS applications, right? If you have a SaaS application like Workday, you would manually instrument it. But if you are pushing your HTML page to some, a CDN or some like storage like S3, that means you upload your HTML, and that obviously then needs to already include the Dynatrace tag. Then this is a way to actually embed all of this in your build process. So now that's fantastic, yeah.
Oh, thanks for pointing that out, Andy. And actually, because we're talking about this in the context of your CI/CD pipeline, it's always a good best practice that when you are deploying Dynatrace, that you'll want to definitely test out how the Dynatrace JavaScript, how it behaves with your existing frameworks, right? And so definitely using Dynatrace real user monitoring well before it hits production by checking it out while you're in your UAT or dev sort of process is a great best practice. And that actually is a great sort of topic to sort of talk about. The next thing that we want to do is what are some of the things that you want to configure first. So if we go back to this view, you'll notice here that one of the things that Dynatrace does is it automatically goes out and detects what JavaScript frameworks are present on the pages that are being monitored. And these frameworks are all different modules that Dynatrace supports. You can click on the framework settings here, and basically it gives you an explanation as to what these frameworks are all about. And then what you can do is you can go in and control which ones are going to show up or which ones you can enable on the Dynatrace side to get better visibility and better insight inside of the user actions and the XHR functions that are being triggered. So as an example, when we were looking at that original page, you may have noticed that ice faces was grayed out. So that particular module is grayed out. For me to enable that module on our side, all I have to do is just click on it, enable it here, and then just click on save. So now I've enabled that specific framework. Now, if you run into trouble where, let's just say for argument's sake, that the Dynatrace JavaScript, maybe it's in conflict with some existing frameworks that you have, going into this page and these framework settings is a good place to start trying to debug that issue. And so what I would recommend is start here, start turning on or turning off these frameworks and see if that changes the behavior that you're seeing in the page. But now basically if I go back to Easy Travel Canada, you can see that I've enabled that framework. These are probably some of the first things that you want to configure. And the reason being is when you do configure them, like I said, this effectively allows our JavaScript to now get better visibility and insight into what the users are doing in terms of those user actions and those XHR functions that are getting triggered. Is that any questions on that, Andy? Does that make sense?
No, you just answered the question that I had. Like, what does it really do? It really then hooks better into some of these frameworks on the front-end side to better detect user interactions, or when the framework is making a call to the back-end side and is capturing more performance and user behavior relevant data. So that's all good.
All right, perfect. So let's go in now and talk about some of the other things that you want to configure. Me personally, my recommendation is that one of the first things that you'll very likely want to do is you want to set up things like user tagging rules. Now, user tagging rules, what are we talking about here? So when we capture user sessions. So here I could go into, say, the session segmentation. And what's going to happen is I'm actually going to see a list. Pardon me. I'm going to see a list of all of my user sessions. And out of the box, by default, okay, what happens is Dynatrace will just identify unique user sessions, but it will essentially identify them anonymously. All right. So we're not going to be able to understand who is who. One of the first things I always recommend is, as a good best practice, specifically if the application that you are monitoring, if it's an internal facing application. So if it's an application that is being used internally by your organization, you want to know who your employees are that are accessing the application. So you can very easily just say, hey, here's Roberta Jones, and this is her session, and this is what she did, right? So that is a really powerful capability. And you can see here that once it's set up, if I go into the session segmentation in this instance of Dynatrace, you can see that if I scroll down here, I've got names for people. So this is an example of how that user tagging allows me to identify who specific users are. I can go in then after the fact and I can search for specific people. So here I can sit there and say, show me Hayner Hastings, right? So now I go apply and I can filter and I can see all of the user sessions that Hayner Hastings did. That is a super useful capability if I'm using Dynatrace Real User Monitoring to monitor an internal facing application. Obviously, it works as well if it's an external facing application as well. But to enable that user tagging, what we do is we go back to our application. Pardon me. We are then going to go back into those settings. So we're going to go into edit. And here, what you can see is we actually have a section on capturing. And the very first one that's at the top of the list is the user tag. Now, setting up user tagging rules, it sounds, ooh, I'm setting up rules and everything like that. This sounds complicated. It's not. It's actually super easy. It's once you understand what we're doing, it's ridiculously easy to set up. So basically, what you can do here is you add a rule, and then you get to select the source type, and you have multiple options here, right? So Dynatrace has a very powerful capability of being able to set up these user tags super easily, and you have a variety of options. So for example, I could use something called a CSS selector. Now, a CSS selector is actually, let me show you an example of how it works. All right. I'm going to flip into a different instance of Dynatrace here. Well, it's the same instance of Dynatrace. This is my application that I'm monitoring. All right. And here I've got, my easy travel web application. What I'm going to do is, if I want to find a CSS selector, all I simply have to do is go into more tools and go into your developer tools. Once you're in your developer tools, the easiest way to do this is there's typically a little selector like this, where this, or chooser, I should say, I've got this chooser that allows me to navigate over different parts or regions of the page. And this allows me to basically see inside of the page these different regions. And up here, you can see in this page, I've got a section that says hello and then somebody's name. So when I click on this, I can now actually see that that region of the page is a span that has this class and has this ID. So all I have to do for choosing a CSS selector is I go copy, and I say copy selector. So now I've copied that selector. I can just go back in here and I can just paste it in. That's it. That's how easy it is. It's super easy to do this. And if you want to use other types or other forms of this, you can use JavaScript variables that might already exist in the page. You could probably, if a cookie is being set that identifies the user, you can use the cookie value and you just literally paste it in. So setting this up, as I just showed you, is really, really super easy, but the result is just immensely powerful. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, if you want to, you can do things like apply a cleanup rule. So for example, in that scenario that I just showed you, it had the very first piece was hello, and somebody's name. So now I can just use some simple regex and basically filter out, anything before that. I want to capture anything after hello as an example. And so just by using that regex, that'll clean that right up. And then the result is you can now search for user sessions by name, and you could literally just go in there and say, okay, show me this user session. And, here's a user session. That's Hainer. That's the person that we were looking for. And here's all of this great detail that's going to automatically be captured. Does that make sense, Andy?
Yep, it does. And it reminded me again, like last time, about some of the old days when we did web performance optimization and we were using the developer tools in the browser. Also back then, the Dynatrace Ajax edition, which then became also part of AppMon, where we were analyzing the structure of a page and then CSS selectors, right? That's a classical thing that I remember now. It all comes back to me. No, it's great. It's and it's so, as you said, it's so powerful, especially as we're giving you multiple options to capture this, because not every time can you pick the username from an HTML field. Sometimes it is a call to like a cookie value. And now one question for you, you don't have to show me, but just to confirm, can we also capture some of this user information on the backend in case something doesn't go all the way to the front end?
100%. Absolutely, you can. As a matter of fact, the way that's done is through a server-side request attribute.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's because I remember, as you said, in some systems, either the user identification, like the username, might be something that you're not legally allowed to capture on the front end, but you might be able to capture an internal user ID, right, or a username that you have in the backend system. And then you can capture it there. Yeah, that's great.
That's it. It's like literally the rule there is server-side request attribute. We've already defined one called username. We just select it and we're good to go.
Yeah. And so folks, server-side request attributes, as Dynatrace is doing end-to-end distributed tracing, either through OpenTelemetry or through the one agent, anything on that distributed trace, method arguments, return values, HTTP parameters, can be extracted as a so-called server-side request attribute, and then you can use it for features like the user tagging here on real user monitoring.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So, hey, folks, for the sake of time, there's a couple of things that, you might want to look into, but I'm going to skip over, but I'll mention them. I'll just mention them briefly. One of them are things like session and action properties. Oh, wait a second here. I'm going to discard my changes because I don't want to make changes in here. Yep, I want to do that. One of them is session and action properties. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll mention it because it's just ridiculously powerful. And it leverages your existing user analytics capabilities that you might have deployed. So if you're using Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, what you can do is you can add a property inside of Dynatrace. And basically I could say, any of these common analytics tools, whether or not it's Google, Cloudflare, AppNexus, Adobe, whatever it might be, here I want to pull in existing properties that might exist, like a marketing campaign, information about a purchase or transaction ID, or a channel that this came from, or a particular page type. And you can see here that you can have multiple different types of properties that typically show up from these frameworks. So if you're using Google Analytics, if you're using Adobe Analytics, integrated into Dynatrace, and then what happens is that information gets pulled in, and what then happens, it gets attached to the user session. So now for Hayner Hastings, I've identified him. Well, I can see this user had a special offer. Here they basically, you can see here their loyalty status is gold. Here was the income that's coming off of this user. Here's the revenue associated with this user session. So all of this information just enhances and enriches your understanding about who Hayner is and what Hayner is doing when he's interacting with your applications. And then you can do all sorts of just exciting analytics on this. But like I said, I could literally spend an entire session just on this kind of stuff. So the next thing, once you've defined your user tag, you want to, I think that the most useful thing for you to do is go in and customize some of the user action naming rules. So what is a user action naming rule? So literally when we're looking at the user session down here, so here you can see the user actions they're kind of descriptive, but not really. All I know is that I've got a load action and I'm loading this page. Then I've got an XHR function that's triggering this request. I don't know what the user did in terms of, did they click on something? Did they enter information into a form? So if I want to have more detail about what the user is actually doing, what I recommend is you go into the user action naming rules and then go down here and add a custom naming rule. Now this, I think, is super cool and super easy. You just click on add a user action naming rule and then put your cursor here, and you'll notice that it gives you directions. Use the curly brackets. So I'm going to use my curly bracket. It gives me a drop-down list. So I'm going to say I want to first understand, and actually before I do this, you can see down below that it's giving us what the default out-of-the-box user action name will look like. But by creating this rule, I could say I want to find the user action. So in this case, a lot of these are people are clicking on things. And then I might want to say on, and I'm going to use that curly bracket again, and I want to say on an element identifier. So now I can see in this particular case that the user is in fact actually clicking on something. And what I might want to say is on, in this particular case, let's use page URL as an example. No, I don't like page URL. So that's easy enough. I can just go back and change this. I can say, all right, fine. I want it on, let's go like page URL path. That's better. Okay. So now what you can see is I've changed that user action rule. So instead of just showing me, literally the page name that's going to be loaded, now we're saying here the user is clicking on orange JSF. So that will show up in the user sessions now once I've created that rule. All right. So this is a really powerful way of getting a better understanding as to what the user is doing when they are in those user sessions. So again, I highly recommend this. I specifically recommend it for tracking things like XHR functions, because an XHR function, typically it's just that request that's going back. And if I have a single page application, I want to know what the user is doing at that moment in time during that single page application that they're working with. Does that make sense, Andy?
Yeah, I'm blown away because I didn't know about the convenience of this. I remember the old days, and this was not. I guess I haven't looked at this feature for a while. It's really nice, and especially with the automated, like the preview on the bottom is cool. Yeah,
it is, and it's just super easy. And see, I've just created the rule, and now the user actions are going to start showing up just as I've described them. So let's go back. There's a couple of other things that I would recommend that you set up first. One of the other things I'd recommend is, and I'm just looking again at time, one of the other things that I'd recommend is under user behavior, you can see here that we have this option for something called a conversion, okay? So if I click on the infographic, you can see that I don't have any conversion goals set up. What does conversion mean? That's kind of like industry jargon, right?
Mhm.
A conversion is the user is doing something I want them to do. Okay. So I might want to track how many users are, completing a booking, for example, or submitting something, or, filling out a form in a correct way. So that is how I judge success for a user. A user is doing something I want them to do. So to set up a conversion rule, what I first need to do is I need to understand what the users are doing. And so this is why you want to use those user action naming rules first, because you want to define those first, because those are going to show up inside of these action views here. So this view shows me my entry actions. In other words, this is where people are starting off. This is what they're doing first. But then I've got my top exit actions. And the exit actions here are effectively, this is going to be what the users are doing last. And so here, if I click on view full details, I can see that I've got a lot of these different actions that are showing up. And let's just say, for argument's sake, and I'm just doing this for argument's sake, this is probably not what you want to do, but I'm going to say that the validation of the credit card is going to be I'm going to judge that's a successful, conversion. So I'm going to go back to this view and I'm going to go set up goals. Where does it take me when I click on this? It takes me right back into the settings. And here I can say add goal. And I want this goal to be, validate credit card. And then what we can do is we can say, what type of goal is this? Is this a goal for a particular action, session duration, number of user actions, or a destination? So in this case, I'm going to say that I want this to be a user action. I want it to be a load action, and the action name, in this case, I want it to contain validate. And that's it. That's all you have to do. You just basically put in a rule that basically says, okay, anytime that we have an action that the name contains validate, that is going to be considered to be a successful session, or a converted session, I should say. That will then start to show up in the UI. So when you start looking at different components inside of Dynatrace here, you'll start to see that once you've defined that, you'll start tracking a conversion trend. You'll be able to compare this information over time to see if the users are getting better or worse, depending upon how I'm changing things. So this conversion goal is super simple to set up. And again, it just allows you to better understand that users are doing what you are intending them to do. Now, the last thing on the configuration side, and there's to be fair, that's a Canadian colloquialism, to be fair. There are a whole bunch of other things that you can configure inside of Dynatrace, but for sake of time, we can't go into every single option. But you can see here, once you click on edit, you've got access to all of these. The one last thing I want to talk about is, obviously a huge concern for a lot of organizations, and that's around data privacy. So when Dynatrace is collecting this information, by default, out of the box, it has certain functionality and features turned on, so that we do not capture potentially sensitive information. However, depending upon your role, your access to things, you may want to control how things are being captured. So for example, if we go into the data privacy here, part of the settings, you can control, for example, do I want to mask end user IP addresses and GPS coordinates? Do I want to mask personal data and URIs? Do I want to mask specific user actions? Do I want to use persistent cookies for user tracking? Do I want to allow Dynatrace to respect opt-in for data collection modes? And do I want to comply with do not tracking browser settings, that type of thing. So all of these settings, you can pick and choose how they're going to be used. And this allows you to effectively operate Dynatrace in a exceptionally secure fashion. So we have, I would say, well, we've got financial institutions, government agencies, public sectors, retailers, you name it. They're all using Dynatrace and have been doing so for years. And because of this control over these privacy settings, we never hear about organizations talking about potential data leaks and things like that coming from Dynatrace. It's just these settings allow you to operate Dynatrace in GDPR compliance, and it even applies to the session replay. So when you enable session replay, you can control how and when things are being masked. You can control it so that if I want to mask things at recording or if I want to mask things at playback, I have that option. And that masking, it can be specific to what's showing up in forms on the page. You can even mask regions of the page using those same CSS rules that we were showing you for the user tags. So for example, if I was back inside of Dynatrace here, and back inside of Easy Travel, and if I was using those same rules that we had before, pardon me while I move stuff around my screen here. So if I was into the developer tools, let's just say for argument's sake that there was a region of the page that I would consider all that information to be sensitive. So in the user session or for the session replay, I could use the same type of rules where I could basically hover over a section of the page. I could say anything that shows up within that CSS region, I want to consider that to be private. And I don't want to capture that. I'm going to mask it at capture. That's a rule that you can set up. So even the session replay can be used in a highly secure fashion where we're not capturing any sensitive information that might be displayed on the page. All right. So we talked about deployment options. We talked about, some of the, best configuration options. Let's wrap things up and talk about how to explore the data, how to use Dynatrace for doing things like analysis, charting, dashboards. So right off the bat, if we go back into Dynatrace right here, you can see that there's all sorts of different types of data that are being displayed. So if I was looking to do an analysis, more often than not, what's going to happen is Dynatrace is just going to give you a button for it, right? So let's just say, for argument's sake, that I want to analyze performance for these composite metrics. So if I click on Analyze Performance, what I get now is a view that is showing me whatever the period of time is that we're looking at. And then often I can choose in this case, see this analysis range? I can pick and choose, and I can move this by double-clicking on sections of the chart. So I could drill into an area of time that's of interest to me. And then what happens is we actually show you more of the detail down below. So here you can see that I'm looking at, in this case, load actions. This is the action type that I'm looking at. If I wanted to look at XHR actions, I could do that as well. But then it's showing me these different metrics that are showing up inside of that chart. And here down below, if I needed a filter on, say, only looking at these metrics for a specific page, like this account logon, then all I do is I click on that filter and it adds that filter automatically. So now I'm looking at only the metrics for that specific user action. So again, very simple to use, very easy, very powerful. Some of the ones that I think are really detailed and really powerful will be things like, for example, if you go into the full details on a user action. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that I want to look at, this is my root page. See, whenever you see that slash, that typically tells us that we're looking at the root or the initial page for a website. So I'm going to click on it, And then now this drills into, in this particular case, a whole bunch of details that I can do, for example, a waterfall analysis. Now, this waterfall analysis is different than what we talked about last week, or last week, sorry, our last session, because this waterfall analysis is an aggregate waterfall. This is super powerful. We're not just looking at one waterfall for one user action from one user session. We're looking out across hundreds of user sessions, and we're aggregating the results. Why does this become really powerful? The reason I think it's really powerful is because I could go in and do a comparison. So I could say, hey, show me the results compared to, say, 2 hours ago. So if I was using Dynatrace RUM in conjunction with, say, a load test as an example, or a new deployment, or I'm changed some configurations, I could say, all right, show me the results for this is our selected time frame. And right next to it, you can see in this, slight purple, that shows us the performance from like 2 hours ago. So did we get better? Did we get worse? Did it impact the performance at all? This is, super, super useful, from a developer's point of view of being able to understand, hey, are we getting better? Are we getting worse in terms of our performance? Some of the other types of analysis that you can do here is you can also slice and dice the data based upon different categories. As an example, I could say, show me a browser breakdown, where now what it's doing is basically showing me, here is all my traffic that's coming from, say, desktop, or here's my traffic that's coming from robots or crawlers. So things like your Google search bots, as an example. This is actually super interesting. We do a lot of work with airlines. And one of the airlines that we were working with was saying that they actually have to set up a parallel set of infrastructure to support all of the traffic that's coming from robots, because they have travel aggregators that are constantly scraping their site looking for new prices. And that just has a massive impact on their performance, because the robot traffic is equal to, if not more in some cases, than the actual human traffic. And so what they've had to do is they've had to set up parallel architecture to actually support those, the traffic coming in from robots as opposed to humans. Just this is why we do this. Why do we separate? Why do we segment this type of information out? Because it has real world implications. But if I go into the desktop view, here you can see that, we break it out by browser. Not only do we break it out by browser type, you can see that, we'll break it out by, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, all that sort of stuff. And if we go into analyze performance here, you can see that we can drill down in the same way that we were looking at before, but I could say, even if there was specific versions of IE that were performing better or worse than another version, we can break down the performance in that way as well. And the same thing where we could go into, for example, geography. In this case, I could go in and say, show me my full world map. As a matter of fact, yeah, let's just do it here. So here I can see where my traffic is coming from across the world, and I can break it down by country. And if I enable the settings, I can even go as far as the individual city. So again, why is this information useful? Well, if I have an application that's being used across the globe, and let's say I'm using a CDN, maybe I want to know when we have issues related to when we have issues related to a CDN point of presence being oversubscribed or misrouted, and all of a sudden traffic in one region is getting a lot slower than other regions. This gives me visibility into that type of thing. So these are a couple of the different things that we can do to analyze information. Now, when it comes to sharing this information, when it comes to visualizing this information, sky's the limit. There's all sorts of different ways of being able to do this. For example, we talked about this a little bit before. If you go into the Data Explorer, the Data Explorer has, in this particular case, templates that allow me to automatically chart things like my core web vitals. So now I basically generated a quick chart that's showing me my core web vitals. And if you remember, that was one of those new Google metrics that we talked about last time. And if I want, I can just pin that directly to a dashboard. So I could say, you know what? I want to pin this to, let's pin it to a new dashboard. So I click on pin and I click on open dashboard. Now I've done two things. I've created a new dashboard and I've already pinned some data to it. And it's right there. So that's how easy it is to actually chart this data and how easy it is to place it onto a dashboard. And then I can control, how's it going to display and that type of thing. So I know, once again, I have managed to talk so much, I ran us out of time. So I think we got through most of the stuff. We probably might want to spend some more time just going on how to do additional analysis, how to, create additional charts and different types of dashboards. Oh, pardon me. It finally caught up with me. I'm wrestling with a bit of a cold.
Well, thank you so much, Jonesy, for take a sip. Make sure you're staying healthy over there. Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you so much for walking through all this. I learned a lot just by looking at all of the new capabilities that are coming in constantly. I had no clue that it's so easy now to define those names in a very convenient way. I also like some of the out-of-the-box analysis features that you've shown. I'm still wondering, though, in our demos, why people are still using Internet Explorer. So maybe we should eventually figure out how to get rid of IE in our demo data.
I know. Oh, I didn't even think of that. You're so right. Oh,
yeah.
You're so right.
Yeah, but it's so good. And I got one or two more questions. And if you don't mind, if you go back to the settings of an application, because this has come up recently. Because you skipped one section, I know because of timing, but there's one section on error detection. And because I constantly get asked in like, how do we detect errors? How does this work? What can we configure? And I think there's a section in there. Yeah.
There is. Absolutely. So here, there are a number of different types of ways that Dynatrace will display errors. And let me show you the result, okay? So first off, we'll show you the configuration, then we'll show you what the results look like. So if I am in a web application, and let's grab something like this one here, Easy Travel. If I scroll down below, you'll see here that we automatically will pull out things like top errors. These errors are based upon request errors. So a request error is typically when a request gets made, you're always looking for something like a 200, maybe a 302, like a redirect, that type of thing. That's fine. That's a good request. But when you start getting into requests where you get a 400, a 500, a 404, these are failures. Those are failed requests. So Dynatrace will actually automatically start to pull those out. If, for example, you get a JavaScript error, Dynatrace will also pull those out. And you can go in and analyze those with way more detail. And if you need to set up custom errors, you can do that as well. But that's all going to be done through here. So in this case, if there was a JavaScript error, as an example, that is a known thing. It's a known property. I know that it's going to throw a particular type of exception. What I can do is I could go in and I could say, ignore certain types of errors. Now, typically the way that that's done is you would go, and I'm looking at an error like this. I'm looking at the error details. I basically click on ignore this JavaScript error, and then it will automatically show up here inside of a list. But that's how you would go ahead and ignore those. For request errors, you can also create different rules. So, for example, if I don't care, if an example, maybe I don't care if a 404 shows up related to a CSS, that's a style sheet, right? Or it doesn't show up, when it's a JavaScript, or if it doesn't show up from a specific domain, you could set up rules here. So you can add different error rules to control how things show up in Dynatrace. One of the more interesting ones here is this CSP violations. That's a really common topic. So if there's an issue with a CSP violation occurring, again, Dynatrace is just going to automatically sort of pull it out.
Mm-hmm. Cool. One other question that I received on the call earlier today, when we show JavaScript errors, like when we do the analysis, I'm not sure if you can go back to the error analysis screen here.
Yep.
And then you scroll down a little bit to the error details. People were asking if we have the ability then, especially for minified versions of JavaScript. As far as I know, right, typically JavaScript files are minified, and then they're so-called mapping files. And Dynatrace has the capability to upload your minified your mapping files, so we can then really show you the full code.
You so we do have that. We've baked an improved. Oh, see, look at this. We've got an improved feature. Well, let's give this a try. Let's try it out. Here we go. Stack. Yeah. So normally what will happen is, and let's find a different error maybe, because typically when you get things like the stack traces, having access to those, being able to upload the actual minified file, that becomes much more useful. But let's go back in here and let's try something like, let's try this one. And I'm not seeing it here.
Yeah, I think if you do me a favor and if you open up a problem, I think I saw the this.
Oh yeah. Let's do it that
problems. Yeah, that's a good one. And then I think you have your JavaScript. What I always do is I go to errors, like I filter on error on the left side, and then there is like the one on the hipster shop logs, like the application that you had. If you scroll down a little bit, I remember. Here we go. That's the one. The JavaScript error rate increase. Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like this one for multiple reasons, but it's really cool that we detect a problem, we automatically show the top errors. Yeah, exactly. And then you can analyze it from here. Exactly. And then the JavaScript issue would then show up. You got the stack trace. Yeah, exactly. And this is where you can also upload the
minify and upload source map right here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can also, because I'm a big fan of automation, you can also upload that minified file as part of your build process. So if you have this file coming out of your CI, just upload it to Dynatrace through an API call, and then it's automatically there.
Very cool. That's cool stuff.
It is cool stuff. Hey, Jonesy, I would say, first of all, thank you.
My pleasure.
Second of all, stay healthy, get healthy. Third of all, I want to have you back, and as you said, maybe we'll do another session where we really talk about some of the dashboards that you can create, some of the other analytics. I mean, there's so much stuff, and we want to keep these sessions to a certain time amount, because otherwise people may not want to watch more than 1 hour and straight. But yeah, it's exciting. I mean, this is amazing. What's there. Yeah.
Super cool. And we've got so much to talk about in terms of user session, the user session query language, being able to slice and dice the user sessions, do analytics off of the user sessions. Yeah, there's so much more.
So much stuff. USQL, I completely forgot about that, of course. Yeah. And then do business analytics on top. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Hey,
well, it's been my pleasure.
Yeah, same here. And I would say we wave for our folks out there. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Folks.
Bye.
See you next time.